Hey y'all, in this video we're going to be setting up an ODBC connection between SQL Server and MySQL database. ODBC just stands for Open Database Connectivity, and what that's going to allow us to do is read data from MySQL, and we're actually going to use the SQL Import-Export wizard to pull some data down from MySQL into SQL Server. So let's get to work. What we're going to do to start with is we're going to actually install MySQL into the Windows environment. Now, most ODBC connectivity does not revolve around you making your own ODBC connections. You're actually going to be making database connections probably to somebody else's database. For you to be able to do that, I need you to understand how these databases are set up and what some of the terminology is around the database setup, because it gets very technical when you go to make the connection. So we're going to jump over into Windows and we're going to start that installation. All right, so let's go ahead and get MySQL installed. What I'm going to suggest is that you just go to Google and type in MySQL download, and that'll take you to something like this. You can click on MySQL downloads. Just scroll down a little bit and you should find MySQL Community GPL downloads, and then look for MySQL installer for Windows. Now once you have that, you'll come up to this screen which says what do you want. Just hit that first download. They'll prompt you to log in or sign up. Just say no thanks, start my download. And once it downloads, just click it once to execute it. If you do it twice, it'll start the installer twice and it'll start fighting. You don't want that. One click, here we go. And it prompts you, you say yes, and prompt again, we say yes, and off we go as the installer launches. Now, you can do the installation different ways, just like with a lot of powerful programs. To make sure that you understand this the best, we're going to do custom so you can see the different pieces that we're going to put in here, because we're going to include the ODBC connectivity as part of the install. So I just hit custom, next, and it says what products. Well, we start with MySQL Server, and we're going to do SQL Server 8 and the latest and greatest. You click on it and you got to hit this little green arrow to move it over. Once it's over there, you can come back and go to applications. We want the workbench and the shell. So grab the workbench, the top one, move it over, grab the, let's see, the shell. Got to refocus my eyes here. Top one, move it over, come back, and then we want to go into MySQL connectors, connector ODBC, the top one, and the top one again, and over. So you should have four things in the products to be installed: the MySQL Server, MySQL Workbench, MySQL Shell, and the ODBC connector. We're going to hit next, and it says okay, gotcha. We've got a path conflict. That's just me because I've already installed this once and the path already exists on my hard drive. And I'm going to hit next and overwrite what's already there, which is fine. Now I'm going to hit execute. Now I need to just wait for a little bit for this to download. If you get any errors when you download, I don't know why it does this, but I've had it happen several times to me. Just go back and forward through them, and you might have to do it 2 or 3 times. It looks like it basically downloads one at a time, and then it gets it ready for the install. So don't worry if you get an error here. Just back up, hit next, hit yes, hit execute, and keep moving. Their installer does not work very well. Now it says ready to install. So it pulled the 4 files down. Now it's ready to go. We can hit execute. Now this is going to take just a little while. While that's going, I want to take just a moment to let you know that this video is being made because one of my subscribers has asked for it to be made. And if this is the type of video that you need, enjoy, and want to see more of, I'd like to ask that you go ahead and subscribe to the ALLJOY Data channel so that you don't miss any of these great videos. Also, it's helpful if you're liking it to like the video and also to share it with others. Really helps the channel out. Appreciate it. I'm going to let this finish and then I'll come back to you once it's finished, so there's no sense you waiting watching the percents tick by. Be right back. All right, so we hit next a couple times. We come to this screen. We hit next again. Use strong authentication. Here's where we put in our password. So just make up something that you're going to remember and make sure they match. And hit next. Then you can leave everything else standard, 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 and let it go through. When it gets to the end of this, we should get a launch of the next step, which will be verifying that it configured. So this is what I'm talking about right here. Start SQL Workbench after setup, start mySQL after setup. So let's do that. We hit finish. We see little activity. There we go. Okay, and there is the workbench. All right. The next thing we need to do is set an environment variable so when we get to the command line can recognize the command without having to move around through all the directories. The best way to do that is get your file manager opened up and navigate down this path. So we're going to go to C drive, we're going to go program files, we're going to go to mySQL, and then to the server and bin. So that's the path. We're going to copy that guy into memory. Control C. Make sure I got it. And then let's launch. If you type in environment, it will come up with set environment variables. Now it's important to kind of follow these steps. So you hit environment variables, come down under system variables, hit new. First hit path, and then hit new, put in the path. So these are all the paths that when you go to the command line that it looks for if you are typing in a command. So now this one is included. Now you have to hit OK, then OK, and then you've got to close this out. If you don't close this out, it don't work. And how do I know? Because I had to fuss with it for a while because I didn't close that guy out. All right, if everything worked, you go in here to the command line, and if the install and the path are done correctly, you should type in mySQL, 2 hyphens, and a version. And if it comes back and tells you the version, success, ta-da, yes. All right, now we've got to set up we're going to log in using the root login. So we're simply going to go and we're going to say MySQL -u root, so that's the user root, -p for prompt me for the password. Let's put it in and this will be whatever password you chose. All right, and you get the welcome sign, show space, databases, semicolon. There we go, finally. And so those are the pre-delivered databases. We can create a database, so create database. Let's call it ALLJOY and put a semicolon in it. All right, and let's do show databases. And now you can see we've got an ALLJOY database created. Moving right along, now that we have ALLJOY database created, we need a table. So I'm simply going to use a create table command to, let's get it here, create table, let's do a plant. We're going to create table plant. We're going to use, first column is going to be plant ID. It's going to be integer. The next one is going to be description. And we're going to go. And now let's do show tables, semicolon. Boom. We've got a table inside of our ALLJOY database. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and insert some values into plant. So I've already done 1 row. And I'm just going to repeat this process to get like 5 rows just so we can see some data when we pull it. So I'm just going to change this value over here from a 1 to a 2. So we're going to say an ID of 2. We're going to say plant 2. And we'll hit go. and then we're going to go to plant 3 and ID 3, and then we'll do a 4 and a 4, and we'll do a 5 and a 5. All right, so we've got 5 rows with plant 1 through 5 with a description that says plant 1 through 5. Now we've got some data to look at and pull when we get our ODBC connector created. Actually, just a quick afterthought. I wanted to show you the data in the table, and really all I did on this is just say select start from plant, and you can see the data that we inserted in manual. That's it. So all of that set up to finally get us to the ODBC connector, right? But without a second database to pull something from, it's kind of pointless. So now we have SQL Server on one side, we've got MySQL on the other side. The goal is going to be to take the 5 records from MySQL, move them over and pass them into SQL Server. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've got to set up an ODBC connector. So for setting up that ODBC connector, there's something I need you to see because it could cause you issues. So you're going to type ODBC in here, and there's 2 different choices, a 32-bit and a 64-bit. The one thing that might get you when you go to 32-bit, if you're trying to set up a new DSN, which is where you're going to set up your ODBC in, if you hit add on the 32-bit, you're not going to see the driver for MySQL in the 32-bit. You're going to need to go, get out of this, you're going to need to go to that ODBC, you're going to need to go to the 64-bit so that when you hit add on like a system DSN, you should see in here this MySQL ODBC ANSI Unicode driver. If you don't see it, you probably hit the 32, you need to be in the 64. Now I'm going to jump you back into the video where I've already got one set up. Now the easiest way, or the first step I guess I should say to do that, is to go into ODBC settings, and you'll see that there's 2 different sources. I'm going into the 64-bit because I know that's where this guy lives, and we can see here user DSN and system DSN. There is really, the difference is the system is for all users, where the user DSN is just for a specific user. And I've already set this up, so I'm just going to show you the settings. And basically you hit add, and then once you hit add, this information comes up and you just fill it in. So I gave it a name and a description. So I said MySQL ODBC connection, and then the description was connection to MySQL, and then the TCP/IP server. This is important. So if you look at the MySQL documentation, it will tell you that the default IP address for this server to communicate, for MySQL to communicate on, is 127.0.0.1. Again, I hate to keep repeating this, but I have to, because depending on the client or the situation of the database you're in, you're going to have to work with a database administrator to find out what that IP address is. If you're in a Fortune 500 company, it's probably not going to be the default. That's susceptible to hackers. So it might not even be the default port. So make sure that this is why I'm showing you and walking you through these things. And then this is the exact user ID and password that we had over on the other side, right? When we created the database. Now the database that I need to use is ALLJOY. So you'll recall that I created a database called ALLJOY, and so I'm going to set that in here so that when ODBC connects, it says, well, what database am I going to? And the answer is ALLJOY. Now when I hit OK, I now have a system DSN called MySQL ODBC Connection. And I'm just going to copy that into memory because I'm going to need it here in a second. Now I've got the ODBC connector. What do I do next, right? So we're going to use the import wizard to pull data from MySQL, and we're going to use the ODBC connector as the technology that lets the two databases talk. So let's launch it and let's see. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, so that's all saved. All right, I'm back. Now, what we want to do is hit Import Export, and here's the Import Export wizard coming up. Okay, we're going to hit Next. Now the data source. The data source is MySQL. So we want to leave this .NET data framework for ODBC right here. So it's the default that comes up. And when you see DSN, that's where you're going to put in your DSN name, right? Well, that ODBC connection name that whatever we called it, that's what goes in there, and then you just leave the rest alone. If I go to Next, it's going to say, well, where do you want it? Well, I want it to come to my SQL Server, so I'm going to tell it to do that. Let's see, OLEDB provider for SQL Server. All right, and then if I did this one right, if I hit the drop down here, I should see my list of databases because I got to tell it where I'm going to put this in specifically in SQL Server. And so here is my SQL Server and the database I wanted it in, and going to Next, and waiting. All right, now here's where I'm going to show you an error and then we'll fix it. All right, so it says copy data from one or more. So if I hit Next, it sees the plant database out there and says, oh, well, I'll make it over here into something called plant. So I'm just going to say, go ahead and make this the ALLJOY underscore plant. All right, and then I'm going to preview. This is where I want to show you the error. There's a issue between like the standard functionality that SQL does when it's doing a copy table, but here's how you get around it. Go back and instead of saying copy data, write a query and just do a select star. So I'm going to say select star from plant and next. And instead of going to query, I'm going to say go to ALLJOY underscore plant. I'm going to hit preview and now it sees the data. We're getting close. I hit OK. I hit next and next again and run immediately and finish. And if everything works, it'll say success. So here we go. So far, a lot of green lights going, waiting. 50%, come on, let's go. Pre-execute. The anticipation is killing me, right? Oh, we got an error. What is the error? Let's take a look because you might get the same thing. Conversion. Okay, so SQL Server got messed up in the conversion. Perfect. I'm glad that you saw that. I'll show you how to fix that. So we go back. And in the mapping, we're going to edit mappings. And you'll see it got the first one right. Plant ID was an int. But for whatever reason, it's saying description is a date. Oh no, description is a varchar. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to do preview again. Looks good. Next, finish. And oh, it's mad now probably because of the table name. Yes, so let's go back and just change the table name to ALLJOY Plant 2. Oops, ALLJOY Plant 2. It's kind of hard to see where the cursor is. Plant 2. All right, preview, OK, next, finish. So that's one of the weird things. Even though your import-export might fail, it still creates the table because it gets to that test and says, okay, I created the table and I'm going to put records in it, and it dies. So there's a couple ways to deal with that. One is you can go back instead of doing a create table in your import-export, you can change that to just an append. But in this case, I just wanted to move through it and I changed it to a different table name. So now I have 5 records that came from MySQL into SQL Server into a table called ALLJOY Plant 2. Let's launch SQL Server and check that out. So waiting. We're launching SSMS, the long anticipated moment of truth. Go ahead and clear out some of this stuff and log in. And I believe I put that into the AdventureWorks 2016. And there it is, ALLJOY plant, which is probably blank, but this guy should have 5 rows in it. And boom. So we have set up an ODBC connection between MySQL and SQL Server. We went in, pulled the data, and there you have it. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Every ODBC connection that you're going to tackle will be a little bit different, but this will give you the fundamentals of what you need, hopefully to be able to attack it with a little bit more knowledge. Hope you have a great day. God bless.